College is a wild ride for young adults, and their mental health often suffers. This podcast addresses the inner battles many college students struggle with. You're listening to Normalize It Forward, where we have raw, unfiltered conversations about young people's biggest mental health problems, how to handle them, and how to achieve a more resilient mind. Time to get rid of those heavy burdens and focus more on self-love and care. Here is your host, Marc Lehman.
Welcome, everybody, to Normalize It Forward. We are the podcast that talks openly about mental health and wellness. Today, we are welcoming Jeff Calhoun. Jeff, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it. And Jeff, in your college years in the early 90s, I know you had played for UConn for your father for several years and sustained a number of injuries over time. Certainly want to chat with you about that in a bit. More recently, Jeff spent the last several years as senior vice president at Wheels Up, a private aviation company. This past year, he co-founded, Jeff, what's the name of the company?
Real SLX.
Thank you. I was going to screw that up, so I figured
No, it's okay.
A sports lifestyle and experience club based in New York City. Jeff also does some work for ESPN as a spotter in the booth during college football games and is the assistant coach of the men's basketball team at the University of St. Joe's. Personally, Jeff is married with 3 daughters, 22, 21, and 19. Jeff, thank you so much for making the time to join us today. How are you?
I'm great. Good to see you again.
Awesome.
We go back a long way.
Absolutely. Lovely to reconnect and hear about all of the things that you're doing. Jeff, as we've talked about, I started this podcast to really give young people the message of how important it is to talk about mental health and wellness and really work at not avoiding the conversation because, as you know, there's so much going on with young people nowadays. Let's go back for a minute to your younger and my younger days at UConn. I know as an athlete coming up through the high school and the college system, obviously your dad as a coach for many years. I just want to ask, point of view wise, what was that like many years ago being an athlete, both in high school and college? Are you able to capture that for us?
I mean, yeah, no, I think, I was always driven, very driven to kind of advance my basketball career. Obviously, I grew up in a basketball home, kind of always had a dream of playing for my father. It was a lot of pressure. I think there's a lot of pressure we put on ourselves to exceed, and we put a lot of pressure. It's kind of one of those things I think we all tend to really kind of focus on the losses, not the wins, which can be challenging, especially at that age. I think it's really kind of hits different kids, kids at different places. But for me, it was, there was a pressure I put on myself for a long time where I knew I was one of the better players, certainly in high school and things like that. And then as you get to a place like UConn, you're not just playing, say, college sports, but you're playing the highest level of college sports. Mm-hmm. I think, the struggles change, the pressure intensifies, and the expectations are difficult sometimes to meet, and balancing those, can be a challenge.
Yeah. I'm thinking, Jeff, you're the original son coach combo. And obviously, over the last few years, we were witnessing amazing things at UConn with Andrew.
Sure.
Dad, I can't help but think as a fan, I'm excited for the year, but I'm thinking about that word pressure. I think there's an expectation here, right, of wins and national championship. And I mean, that couldn't be kind of a higher expectation for those players. And so, immense pressure, right? Immense pressure,
yes.
Expectation, and sort of, I got to imagine for a young person, that pressure is sort of above your pay grade at that age, right? And it's hard to understand nowadays with NILs and everything. There's a lot of finances involved as well.
Yeah.
So that's kind of an interesting segue. I mean, the youth of today, I think, as we talk about mental health and we talk about certainly on college campuses, anxiety and depression being really at an all-time high. I know that, you've got 3 kiddos and, have been through the college years with them, as have I. And I think that, witnessing this and hearing about this, it's a little scary as a parent, to hear how
Yeah.
intense it is, right?
For me, I guess kind of the bridging those 2 points, I think for me it was always difficult. There was an added pressure, certainly growing up in stores as my dad's son. I think my basketball, I was a recruited high school athlete. I had other options to go places similar to UConn. I knew going to UConn, it was going to be difficult. I think it's funny, the things I thought would be a problem, maybe like relationship with teammates and things like that, didn't end up being the problem. Things I didn't see coming became a little bit more challenging for me. But, I think as you look at what kids go through today, I look back and feel very fortunate in some ways to not have had to deal with social media and some of the expectations and the internet and all of these things where these kids just can't turn it off and they don't have solace. That I could find even in, whether it was going home or going to a friend's house or whatever it was. And you could just kind of find a little bit of an oasis of calm and get away from it as best you can. I think whether you're an athlete or just, the non-athlete student, there's just no escaping it. It just never stops. It never gives you the ability to turn off. I certainly have seen it with my kids, how difficult it is.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you bring out a great point. I think peace, right?
Yeah.
Having some peace in your day. And, we can certainly talk about how that happens. Cause I think for lots of people, whether they're young adults or older adults, we all need it. Like we all need peace in our life. And, our phones are they're on all the time. And, we do have the option of turning them off. We just sort of overlook that option a lot. I try to point out for my patients, at least, like the advantages of things that you can get on phones, like meditative apps, for example. I can't tell you how many college students I've worked with over the years that use, Headspace or Calm or other meditative apps.
Mm-hmm.
Just great for kids to kind of pop their earbuds in and listen to and just kind of feel that peace. But you're right. I think nowadays it is hard. It's really, really hard, especially as an athlete. I mean, I think athletes are constantly kind of moving, always going, pulling, all that stuff. Right.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think like the pressure of a bad game or the pressure of, hey, this isn't going as well. And that's typical. That happens to everybody, even the best players. Ray Allen and Donnell Marshall, who I played with, had their struggles. That's not different for them than it was for me. But I think now there's an audience out there who has a voice as to, what's going on with you, how you're doing. It's not always a kind voice or a supportive voice. I mean, there are those people out there. I don't want to overlook that, but it's easy to find the negativity. I think it's also easy for these kids to just feel the pressure of it all, whether it's the people they grew up with, their family, fans of the team. When things just are going, there's bumps in the road and you're figuring it out. We live in a very now, a now society where the results are expected. And like I said, the criticism comes quick. I think it's really, really challenging for these kids. And as you added, like with the money coming in on NIL, it's just dialed it up where people feel more entitled. And I'm sure kids feel much more pressure because they're getting paid.
I have to imagine. Now the non-athlete, the typical kid who goes to school. I mean, this year I've been consulting at a private school in the area, and I'm watching, as my high school students are filling apps out and they're kind of transitioning to go off to college. I think the non-athlete, typical college kid, there's still a ton of pressure and competitiveness around, what school they're going to. And the concept of like, are you going to be happy there seems to kind of get lost. I asked that question, but it's almost like that's not asked of the student themselves. Yeah. Is that something you noticed with your kids?
100%. None of my kids are athletes in college, and so I feel like that completely. Like, right. It's much more of a style over substance conversation now because they're seeing other kids go to this school or that school. And, I just think we were probably in the perfect, at your age and my age, like we were in this bubble where you just kind of knew the kids in your town. You knew maybe some people from other places, but there wasn't this pressure of the entire, world, the entire country of kids trying to get in and look where I got in, look where, I got in, and this battle to get into these competitive schools, which has only gotten worse. Yeah, I can't imagine, again, like in all the information that's out there. And to your point about, like the apps that are on the phone, there's so much good information. There's so much good that's come out of this, where kids are so much more informed than we were. But there is absolutely another side to that coin, which is all that pressure and all that expectation. And sometimes, kids just feeling that rather than, hey, this is, it's going to work out regardless of where it is, because I'm going to make it work out. And ends up being the place that I was meant to be at. Maybe this is the better fit for me rather than this is the place that looks best on my Instagram post that I'm going to.
Yeah. Yeah. Great point. Great point, Jeff. I'm curious your thoughts on this, because as I alluded to earlier, anxiety rates across the country, depressive rates across the country are really at an all-time high. For parents like us, it's terrifying to know that suicide is the second leading cause of death in this age bracket. And, I just tell parents, I'm like, that's reported. It's probably the number one, because a lot of times it goes unreported. It's always terrifying to me when I hear stories like that. But unfortunately, every few months I hear about another one. And so it leads me to think, all right, what can kids do? What are those things that beyond seeing a therapist, what are those things kids can do tangibly on campus that might be helpful? And one of those big topic areas is self-care. Self-care is a phrase that's been thrown around a lot in the last many years. And I guess I'm curious, when you think of self-care, Jeff, whether it's your girls or whether it's yourself or other people that what does self-care mean to you?
I guess primarily for me, what first jumped into my mind when you asked the question is I think certainly when I was their age, I don't think it was as accepted or as normalized to talk about how you were doing that way. I know, and I have very loving parents, couldn't ask for better parents, but like I grew up in a home where, this was probably me putting it on myself, but like being tough was this ideal that I tried to live up to. I tried to be as tough as possible. And to me, I thought tough was, look what I can take. You know what I mean? As opposed to, I've since learned that that's not a way to describe toughness. Toughness comes in a lot of forms and much better and healthier forms than I think the way I had defined it. So I think, just being able to certainly primarily to recognize the way you're feeling and feel, finding a community, finding, a therapist or friends or family community where you feel comfortable talking about the way you're feeling and being able to say, I'm not doing great, or I'm going through this, or, reaching out. I think that's a big piece of it. But I think, again, getting back to our original, what we had talked about previously was because the world doesn't really stop now, and because you don't have the ability to turn it off. I think really it's finding that time to turn it off and to just settle and be at peace and find some tranquility in this kind of, no matter where you are, it's always on and it's always buzzing. That to me.
I love that, Jeff. And, you made two really good points I just want to highlight. One is, that conversation, really kind of the crux of why I created this podcast of people having conversation about mental health issues, whether it's, talked about in those terms or kids are just talking about stress. I find it unbelievable that when I talk to college kids and I say, hey, have you talked to any of your friends about how your classes are going? They're like, no kids do that, in college. Kids don't talk about class. And it's like, all right, so there's this huge chunk of stuff going on in kids' worlds, academics, that no one talks about with each other, right? And kids can feel a ton of pressure, from classes not going well, and they're sitting with that alone, So the classic kind of freshman who thinks they studied enough, they fail their first exam, and then they don't tell anybody, but they double down in their mind and they're like, I'll just do better on the next one. Right. That's a formula for anxiety, So I think normalizing the conversation and for kids to understand that there are adults, whether it be you and I or RAs or RDs or coaches or assistant coaches or teachers or other professionals on campus that would understand and lend an ear and sit down and have a conversation. They may not be able to help them solve things, but they'll certainly listen, and be able to offer that to them. And then your second point, which I think is really spot on, is for kids to find a place, a time in their schedule regularly to create some peace for themselves. As strange as it sounds, if I'm seeing patients all day long, sometimes I'll just, I'll go and I'll have, lunch at a park, nearby just to kind of clear my head, and get out of the office. Certainly exercise is a big one for me in terms of just clearing my head and kind of getting the clutter out. Because you can imagine I might hear a few things during the week,
Yeah, sure.
and I'm sure for yourself as well, like everybody's got these busy schedules. So why should college kids' lives be any different, right?
Right.
Creating that peace. And I encourage kids, regularly to find that, whatever it looks like for them. For some kids, working out is great. For other kids, they hate it. So it's like finding something else, that they might enjoy to help bring that stress level down. So great
Yeah.
suggestion. Great suggestion.
Yeah, no, and I mean, I guess I just wish the kids knew, I just recently had a conversation with one of my daughters about something like this, where, it's one of those things where, look, it's kind of it's the burden, I guess, of youth, right? Is thinking that if you're going through it, you're the only one who's going through it. And trying to have that conversation with my daughter that I promise you, if you're feeling this way, almost everybody around you is feeling this way too. And sometimes it's not easy, and I get that, but sometimes I think you'd be really pleasantly surprised if you had the vulnerability to tell somebody else that this is how you were feeling. I just know that it's a lesson I learned later in life, is that, sharing the way I was feeling about things and finding that these people that I was very close to were going through the exact same thing on a parallel path. Neither one of us had ever talked to each other about it, but finding that other person and finding that, hey, me telling my story actually helped them and it helped me, and building a community of people that do listen and are there for you and can understand what you're going through.
Great advice. Great advice. And I completely agree. I mean, statistics support what you're saying, so if you look at, one of the advantages in some ways to the majority of kids being anxious is it's like you can say to yourself, all right, I'm not in the minority anymore.
Yeah.
Like there's a lot of kids out there, right? So yeah, super good advice. And I think it's important for kids to hear that and realize, use the keyword vulnerability. If you can lean into that conversation a bit and say, hey, have you been stressed about this class? Because I've been super stressed about it, kind of thing. And then the conversation just sort of flows. I'm amazed at how many kids get to school and are super homesick and never tell anybody around them, how homesick they are. They'll go to social media, but they won't tell kids around them. And it's like, wow, I joke like kids, you'd have to come from a pretty awful home to not miss something, as you college,
100%.
right?
Look, I grew up I went to high school in Stores. True story. My dorm room looked at my high school. I literally could see my high school from my dorm room window. My dad's office was maybe a quarter mile, from my dorm room. I saw him every day. And my parents lived 6 miles away, and I was homesick.
There you go.
If I can be homesick, anybody can be homesick.
That's funny, Jeff. That's funny. I'm curious. That's kind of an interesting transition to my next question for you. I feel like for so many adults I talk to, the college and the high school years, we had our mentors, we had our people that would make a suggestion, and maybe we're able to years later look back and go, man, that was like really helpful. And that person really had an impact on me. Could have been, someone that you least suspected, in high school, a club coach of something, or a friend's parent, certainly an advisor. And, many, many coaches over the years with athletics and teachers and all sorts of adults. I guess I'm curious, as you look back as an adult, are you able to kind of pull out one of those statements that somebody made to you that really had an impact?
I think, I think a couple people, but one specifically, we had our academic advisor for the basketball team at UConn was a professor of biology at UConn, and his name was Ted Tagan, and he was a pretty well-known guy on campus, a great person. I certainly, as I battled through injuries, and it put me in a pretty good depression, which I didn't kind of know, I think, what it was. I just kind of woke up one day and realized I'm not in a great place, and I was having a tough time focusing on school. Him just kind of coming to me and saying that he noticed what was happening with me, and just kind of lending an ear and telling me, look, this doesn't, he actually told me at the time that, hey, look, you don't have to stay in school. You don't have to, you want to take a break. If you don't want to go to college, if that isn't for you. It wasn't the path I ended up choosing, but I think in that moment, in a bigger conversation, those kind of statements gave me the freedom to realize I don't have to do all of this. If I do this, it's because I want to do it, and because it's right. But just knowing that I didn't have to stay on this path, knowing that people were there to help me, knowing that people got it. I just thought what I was going through was me. I had built a bubble where, like we talked about, I'm the only one going through this. Nobody understands what it's like to be me. Nobody understands what I'm going through, and understanding that no, everybody has their own challenges here, and everybody's dealing with something. But yeah, that moment of and it really helped me.
That's an awesome story, and good for Ted for taking the steps to do that. Cause I feel like, for adults, that's also a vulnerable decision. Like, do I say something? Do I not? And not necessarily realizing how big of an impact that can really have on a kid to 100%. Say, hey, I see something's going on, here are some ideas and some suggestions. I like the way he put that to you. I mean, it sounds like it was really a pivotal moment, during your college years. So thank you for telling us that story, Jeff. I appreciate it. I think the life of a young person is really, really hard. And equally, I would say parenting young people has become challenging, and I think that when it comes to adding in things like mental health, but just even more generally pressure, I think one of the hardest parts that I've experienced as a parent is seeing my kid feel that pressure and not being able to relieve it for them, Yeah. How would you describe sort of one of the challenges that you've experienced as a parent over the last many years of young adulthood?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really kind of very similar to you. It's just seeing the anxiety that my kids have felt for their own, three girls have each had their own very unique challenges, have felt it for very different reasons in very different ways. And realizing that I didn't grow, there's a gap, not just in age, but just in technology and the world, right? It's changed so much. What the world changed from my parents to me is not a fraction of what it's changed from me to my girls.
I agree.
And so all of that, I think feeling, I don't want to say helpless, but how much can I identify with actually what they're going through? But I do think, having gone through it myself, having maybe the difference between our parents and our generation was a little bit more understanding of these issues. And I think we all came out of growing up maybe a little bit more in tune to mental health and anxiety and the challenges. I've just always made a really conscious kind of effort to not forget what it's like to be their age, because it's hard. It's really hard. And always let them know. I think for me, it's always been important to let them know that, while I certainly don't see myself as a finished product, I know they see me as somebody who has it together and, has a job and has had some success and has done things in their life. But I wasn't always that way. I was, and being vulnerable enough to tell them, hey, I made mistakes that, you haven't made. I made a lot worse mistakes than you made. And I was in a very similar situation to you when I was your age, letting them have the understanding that we're not the adults who have all the answers, right? Like we don't, and we were also like them.
Right. We're human beings. I mean, we made our mistakes, just like them. And I think that, for you to be able to be that open and honest with your kids, I'm sure opens doors for them to be able to be open and honest back.
Yeah.
Jeff. So that's smart. Let me ask you this. I want to put you on the spot for 1 second and just ask, I think my audience is not only parents, but also students. And I'm thinking that there'll be athletes that might be listening to this conversation. Yeah. And I know that in athletics, not only do you have several coaches, but you got a whole bunch of support staff. Obviously, you got your teammates. I guess I'm wondering, do you have any words of advice for an athlete going through it now, right? And let's say feeling depressed or feeling anxious or just not right, not themselves. Any words of advice?
Yeah, I think it's to reach out. I just know, coaching, to your point, there's enough people, hopefully on a staff, on a coach, or in support. There are resources for you. And most people are in coaching. For the vast majority of people are in coaching. I mean, I do it for free. I volunteer at St. Joe's. I do it because I love being around. I love being around basketball, but more importantly, I love being around the guys that I coach. And so the reward is the relationship. For me, when being trusted by one of the kids who plays for us with the way they're feeling, with what they're going through, like I was saying, most people are involved in this because they love being around kids and they want to help kids. And just know that that's there for you. And to be vulnerable. Again, it's not easy. I get it. But I think by and large, you'll always be pleasantly surprised when you do, the way people will receive it. If for some reason you're at a place where you don't feel supported and you don't have those people, then I'd probably tell you you're at the wrong place, right? Because there's not many of those out there, but they do exist. And if you find that, then it's probably not the right place and you should leave.
Yeah, good suggestion. Good suggestion. How's the team looking this year at St.
We're going to be good.
Yeah,
we're going to be good. We've been very fortunate. We've had really good players, really, really good kids. So we started with 15 freshmen. It was a school that, didn't have men. So with first year they had men, we had a team, and within 3 years we were the number one team in the country. So
wow,
we've had really good success. We're trying to build on it, but it should be an interesting year. Yeah.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic. Well, good luck to them. Good luck to you guys.
Thank you.
You and I had talked a bit offline about this, and one of the unique parts to this podcast is we ask for the conversation to continue. So we'll continue. You and I will continue to talk offline about individuals that perhaps who might be good guests in the future, Jeff. But I just want to thank you for your time. I know you're super busy. I appreciate you making some space and allowing for us to reconnect about such an important topic. And so just thank you. Thank you so much for being here today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely, Jeff. You have a great day. We'll talk soon.
You too. All right.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
That's all for this episode of Normalize It Forward. May this conversation serve as a reminder that you are never alone in facing your mental health struggles. There are always people who can help. To dive even deeper into our journey of normalizing one of the biggest issues young people face, check out more episodes of the show at youareheard.com. It's UAREHEARD.com. Continue gaining access to the right tools, the best resources, and the most insightful advice to achieve positivity, mindfulness, and genuine happiness.